It's time, though, now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is it actually time to nationalise or even renationalise water? Environment Secretary Steve Reed has said that every single river in the country is contaminated. And he's not surprised that people are worried about swimming in the sea, lakes and rivers around this country. It is the latest blow to the water industry amid the sewage scandal and the controversies over pay to senior bosses. So I'm asking for the Great British Debate this hour, is it time to nationalise water? Well, joining me now is Head of Campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck, former leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, political commentator James Mathewson, and lead campaigner at We Own It, Matthew Topham. Well, I'm going to start with you. Elliot, look, is it realistic? Can we actually nationalise it? Can the government take this back in?
I mean, it certainly could. The question is whether it should want to. If you look at almost every single part of the state at the moment, it's failing. I mean, let's look at one person who's campaigning on this on Twitter, someone called Ellen Passanak, who cannot get a driving test until November. Every single part of the UK state is effectively crumbling. And the idea that we would want them to take yet another key responsibility into their hands when they can't already do what they're supposed to be doing, I think is just completely preposterous. Yeah,
but look at the state of it. I mean, this is water is life. If we do not take this back, we will die because we need water. It's not like, I mean, is there a country in the world that doesn't have, that isn't nationalised with their water?
Listen, you know, if you actually look at the state of UK water, it's actually much, much better than the statistics will have you believe. We're actually roughly on average relative to European nations. One of the reasons why we think water is so bad is because over the last 5 to 10 years, every single pipe that releases sewage into rivers and other water bodies have had monitors attached to it. They didn't previously have monitors. So essentially, we didn't know how bad the state of the water was. Every time we did test it, it performed incredibly poorly. And actually, there has been record investment over the last 20 years, way more investment than was under nationalisation. And actually, the quality of our water now is much, much better than it was a few decades ago. It's just that we monitor it much more closely. Of course, there's more to be done, but nationalising water is absolutely not the solution.
Oh, you think not? All right, let's go to lead campaigner at We Own It, Matthew Topham. Matthew.
Well, I think a key question that was dodged there is, does anyone else in the world run water like this? And the truth is they simply don't. There's a tiny part of the Czechia network that is privatised in the way that England and Wales have privatised their water. No one else has done what we have done and privatised the whole kit and caboodle. And there's a clear reason for that, because the system is completely breaking down. It doesn't work to actually increase investment. What we've seen is that private investment is a myth. In fact, over the last 30 years, we've seen 85 billion taken out of the industry by shareholders in net terms. And what we actually want to be seeing is a greater level of investment. Everything so far has been paid for by our bills. It is the people of this country who have paid for the investment that's happened to date, not the private sector. And in fact, if we were having the system in public ownership, it would be cheaper and faster to deliver the large-scale investment that we need.
And also, we would have more control over how it would be dealt with, as far as I can imagine. I mean, just to give you some stats here, raw sewage was discharged for more than 3.6 million hours into our rivers and seas. That was an increase of 105%. James Mathewson, what do you think? Surely we can't carry on like this.
And I think it's fascinating, and the comments from the Taxpayers Alliance come as no surprise. However, I think the fact that they're only being defended now by the Taxpayers Alliance and by people who have the interests of private companies and privatisation at heart, because this was Margaret Thatcher's idea. This was one of her great moves to privatise and to make things more efficient, was the idea at the time, and to give things over to the private sector. Now, I'm always confused by the argument. It was the same with the rails, about taking them into public ownership or renationalising them, that somehow they're going to be exactly run as they were run when they were nationalised last time. That makes no sense at all, because you've got a complete different government. You've had so many different governments between now and then, and many, many years have passed, many different technological advancements. All sorts of things have changed. And I'm up here in Scotland, I'm in Edinburgh, where the water is public and it is nationalised, because they resisted Thatcher's move to do that. And I'm telling you, it's one of the best things they've done. I won't praise the Scottish government a lot, especially the SNP one, but they've held firm with it, and they've managed to make sure that everybody is very proud of having this system that's public. And it's our water, as you point out, Nana, it's life-giving. It's our essence of life. It's the very thing that we need to survive. Why on earth should a private company be making profit?
Well, I'm going to come back to you, Elliot, because he just said it's not surprising that you would say that.
Well, listen, I mean, this is always a problem. So many of these campaigners refuse to deal with the actual arguments and the actual data and instead just cast aspersions on people's motivations. The simple reality is investment in water has climbed significantly since privatisation. At the same time, bills have barely changed over the last 20 years. Yes, profit is being made, but listen, profit is the thing that actually drives the economy. It drives the life force of the economy. The stats are very, very clear. Water privatisation has broadly been a success. In Scotland, the state of water is actually significantly worse. We have about half the number of leakages every year than they do in Scotland. So I think it's just complete non-starter.
But it's the water quality that we're talking about here, and it's the
we didn't used to monitor.
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, we've had over 105% of these the discharges into the sea or into our rivers just because it's got a bit of extra rain. We've had a revolving door of people from Ofwat due to the top of the water companies. Neil Hamilton, I just can't see it feels almost as though it is corrupt. Now, I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that's the feeling that I'm getting here. Neil Hamilton.
Well, it requires heroic levels of optimism to think that politicians are going to be better managers of infrastructure companies like the water companies than people who are involved in running these businesses in the private sector. But what we know of the way the public sector is run throughout this country, from the NHS to the DVLA, it's an absolute shambles. There's no control just because politicians are in charge of it. Quite the opposite, in fact. And this is a highly regulated business, the water industry. You've got Ofwat, the regulator, that sets the targets for water leaks, for sewage leaks, etc. And if there's a failure to meet those targets, the companies get fined millions of pounds.
Yeah, but
so if the targets need to be tighter,
Neil, we know that they factor in the fines into their behaviour. So they don't really, they're thinking, 100 million to them is pretty much nothing when you think of the billions that they're making, and yet they did not invest in the waterways, and we can't control that. They said they would. They said they would change lots of the pipes and so on and so forth. They didn't, Neil. That's the problem, isn't it? We have no control.
Well, that isn't the case, as Elliot has given you the figures on that a moment ago. I mean, because
it is the case.
If the water industry was nationalised, it would have to compete every year for the amount of money that it wants to invest against the NHS and other public services. Given that we've got £2.5 trillion of national debt at the moment, which costs us well over 100 billion a year to finance in interest costs, it's a heroic level of optimism, as I said earlier on, to think that you're going to get a better deal out of the Chancellor of the Exchequer than you would get out of the private capital markets.
But I think the point of this is that it's the water quality and the quality to our lives. I mean, we have no control of it. Matthew.
No, but I mean,
well,
the water...
absolutely. Let's come on to control.
No, Matthew. Thank you,
Yes,
Matthew.
thank you. Let's come on to this key issue of control. Who's looking to go back to this 20th century version of running services in public ownership? Certainly, campaigners I know are not. What we want is what they have on the continent. So let's look at Paris water, whereas, of course, we saw just days ago, the deputy mayor of Paris swam in the Seine. The Paris water was taken back from privatisation in 2010, and they haven't returned it to a top-down civil servants way of running things. They have a democratic board. So the company board has sitting on it representatives of its workers, the people who actually are there trying to clean up the system. It has representatives of civil society through the Paris Water Observatory. That's the kind of system we could have here. Imagine if the fantastic campaigners of Windrush Against Sewage Pollution or the Ilkley Clean River campaign were not on the outside having to shout in to try and get change, but were there with all their expertise and knowledge and their experience on the ground, helping shape decisions on the company board. That's the kind of model we should be approaching in the UK as well.
All right, well, let me just ask you all then, one by one. Elliot Keck, is it time to nationalise water, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Neil Hamilton, yes or no? Is it time to nationalise?
Absolutely not, no.
James Matthewson, yes or no?
Yes, it's well overdue.
And Matthew Topham, yes or no?
Like the poll just days ago, 8% of us are saying yes, we want it back in public hands.
So that's a yes from you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. This is GB News.